Start live broadcast and boom. Welcome to the first live broadcast in a while, folks. So hopefully everyone will be signing in. A little bit of a delay for those of you who are new. So we'll just yak it up until people get signed on board, and then hopefully you will find this info very informative and educational. I want to bring stuff. This is like real situations, real stories behind the stories that are meant to educate people on what really goes on in the fitness industry and how and why. And hopefully it'll help people to further their understanding of scamology and what passes for just being taken for granted as truth when it's nothing but the truth. So we definitely want to try to educate people as good as we can. So let me know you're out there. When you're out there, either type in a comment or just throw an emoticon up there or whatever, and I'm going to get to it shortly. So I definitely ran across this old picture, and lately I've been getting a lot of questions about supplements of in various forms, like people who are doing keto, who you know want to know about the supplements that go with that, and then there was all that nonsense with that. I think it's still a hangover from all that Chris Kresser nonsense from him being on the Joe Rogan podcast and getting all that exposure for a guy who's clearly a scamologist. Clearly, when you see all the concoctions and supplements that he sells and the claims he was making about research, that there's no way he didn't know he was being deceptive, there's no way he couldn't have known he was lying. And so all these things go without being challenged. So I thought, why not tell some stories from my own past so that everybody knows just what the hell is going on. I think people forget that I was at the top of the industry for a good 20 years before I broke away and did my own thing. So I think it's important to talk about that. So hopefully you can all see and hear me well. And I'm going to get to the story behind the story and tell you about some. And we're going to do more of this as time goes on. In the next few weeks, I will be able to. Let's just say I'll be able to be a lot more open about stories from my past and those years, etc. So I'm looking forward to. Someone asked, will I talk about the steroid years and all those things? Yes, of course I will talk about those. I just didn't want it to be something. I didn't want to open that door and then have it to be something that's all everyone wants to talk about. So, I kind of avoided that for a lot of years since I'm so far removed from that world, but I definitely was part of that world. And if we have time at the end, I wouldn't mind addressing something along those lines to do with. I don't know how many of you saw the Ronnie Coleman documentary. So I have some thoughts on that as well that we could share. But I want to get to the story behind the story, some insider secrets. And I've shared these things with you guys before, but I'm going to share them more now. So I'm just going to pop up my presentation up there and shrink myself. So hopefully you guys can see all that. Let me know that you can. And we're going to get right to it. Tricks of the trade. So a lot of people are unaware of, or they forget. I got a lot of new followers of my 4 decades plus history at the very top of the industry, the bodybuilding industry. And before there was an internet where anyone could just hang out a shingle online and develop a website and call themselves an expert, you actually had to be one. So, I was a writer, feature writer, ghost writer, columnist, supplement advisor, paid endorsed athlete, paid endorsed expert on supplements. But the insider story behind the story I want to get to tonight is, why were they paying me? So after I do this little storytelling about what you're about to see, then if I forget, then remind me to spell it out in spades. Why these supplement companies put me on salary for all those years and even competed for my services. And I'll tell you why that is. So really, really important stuff. So I just want you to take a good look at this series of pics. So this was a famous picture of me back in the day. And I'm just going to leave that up there for you to see. And as I discuss sort of the story behind the story of this picture and why it's so important to the thing at hand. So you guys can sort of eyeball that as I go along, but take a really good look at this picture because the story behind it has a lot to do with what I call magician's tricks. of the fitness industry that very few of us know, and many of us have profited from, including myself. So this has a lot to do with Robert Kennedy. Hopefully, everyone still remembers who Robert Kennedy was, a publisher of Muscle Mag, where I had most of my salary and my column and everything. But he also had like 22, 24, 25 different magazines on the go near the end before he passed. Oxygen magazine, of course, Ghost wrote for that. There was a lot of um, publishing back then. He was the main competitor for Joe Weider, who had Muscle and Fitness and Flex. So Bob Kennedy was an industry expert, and not a lot got past him. He couldn't pull the wool over his eyes. By the time he met me, he had already been where I am now, 4 decades at least into the sport. So I want to give you the background of this photo and take a good look at it as I give you the background. So I used to go visit Bob at Muscle Mag offices. He had the offices right near the airport out in Toronto, near Toronto Airport in Mississauga. And once we got to know each other pretty well, once every couple of weeks I would drive over, usually for lunch. And there was a restaurant right next door to the Muscle Mag offices where Robert Kennedy, his right hand man, you would know him if you were following the magazines back then. You would know him as Johnny Fitness. His real name was Gino Edwards. So I was there on a different matter one time, and we went for coffee next door. And Bob Kennedy and Gino were really frustrated about a certain top pro bodybuilder at the time. Now, Bob Kennedy used to fly people in, top bodybuilders in for photo shoots, and they would come from the US, they would come from Europe. So he would have to pay to fly them in, fly them home, put them up in a hotel, pay the photographer, unless Bob was going to do the photo shoots himself. So it was quite costly. So they had planned for this big photo shoot for this guy that was supposedly getting ready for a top pro contest, and the guy just blew it. He was supposed to be getting ready for a contest, but he began binge eating and he couldn't stop, and there was no way he was going to be photo shoot ready, so he canceled at the last minute. And Bob had just found this out, so we went next door and we were having a coffee and some lunch, and he was rightfully pissed off. So I suggested to them, why not get someone else? I mean, how hard could it be? And then Gino and Bob were explaining to me how they wanted to run this fat burning article or maybe a series of articles. And when this guy's in shape, he's so vascular, he's got veins popping everywhere, and they really wanted to use him. And this guy had let them down before, and they should have known better. And I knew the bodybuilder they were talking about. And in my head, I thought to myself, well, what's the big deal? So I just said to Bob, well, I know someone you could shoot that could be that vascular. And at the time, we weren't as close as we became, but Bob knew I had some pretty good connections, and that's what he thought I had in mind. So I told him, well, I know someone you could shoot. And he right away said, well, who is it, Scott? And how long will he need to get ready? And I politely told him, well, this time, Bob, I'm thinking of me, and I can be ready by Monday. And it happened to be a Thursday. I remember this clearly, and because of what I'm about to explain to you. So Bob looked at me incredulously and kind of was shaking his head like this. And then Johnny Fitness, Gino joined him, trying to explain to me that I didn't really understand what they were looking for. And, they wanted this and they wanted that and the vascularity. And I said, sure, I know what you're looking for, and I can be ready on Monday, and I'll be as vascular as that pro ever was, because I knew the guy well. And I could tell Bob was really hesitant. He wanted to turn me down. And I just said, I'll tell you what, Bob, if I'm not every bit as vascular as that guy for your purposes, for what you need, I'll pay the cost of the photo shoot myself. And Bob still wasn't convinced. I'll give you a little more background. It was late spring, early summer that day. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and Kennedy looks over at me across the table and says, well, I can see just sitting here with you, Scott, you aren't vascular enough for what we're looking for. You don't understand. And I said, I'll be that vascular by Monday, Bob. And he just sort of looked at me like that's not possible. And Gino joined him. I said, trust me, Bob, have I ever let you down before? So he reluctantly agreed that even if I wasn't ready in the way he wanted, which he was sure I couldn't be ready from Thursday to Monday, there was no way I was going to fit this image he had in his head of the vascularity he needed. He could at least get some training shots of me and whatnot for the file, what we called back then, it's called B-roll. He could just, if he had to blow a photo shoot that was already scheduled, at least he could blow it doing B-roll because he was going to use me for other stuff anyway. So, but he wasn't going to come to the photo shoot. He sent somebody else, and because he was sure I couldn't be ready and wouldn't be vascular enough, is what they kept saying by Monday. So again, keep looking at that picture to see if I was vascular enough. So this all has to do with magic tricks, but context matters too, because here was a guy who knew everything that was going on in the bodybuilding world and knew all the top bodybuilders, and yet he didn't know what I knew. So he was making a few assumptions based upon what he could see, but I was counting on exactly what he couldn't see and what he couldn't possibly know that I knew. And I call it magician's tricks because, like any good magician, I know where the trick is. So I was already lean. In fact, I was very lean. So while it was warm outside the day I met Bob and Gino for coffee, the air conditioning was on at the coffee shop. And when you were lean, unless you're very warm or hot, then veins hide well below the surface of the skin as a sort of metabolic compensation effect. So although I was lean, he couldn't certainly see that I would look vascular in that environment that day. And there's more to it, of course. I would use this metabolic compensation in reverse as my advantage as well. And I'll get to that because it gets to the heart of the matter. But I just want to explain the story behind the story. Bob also didn't know that at the time that I was on the cycle diet. He really didn't know what that was. We wrote about it later on, a few years after knowing him. But the day I met with Bob and Gino, back then at the time, I was cycling calories, and especially like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I would go lower and lower in calories. So my muscles would look a lot flatter and a lot less volumized. And I only did that really out of desire to have epic cheat days. There was really no other reason for it. I just wanted to make the cheat days like even more epic for my own, indulgence, really. But on my all out cheat day that we now call a spike day or a refeed day was always on Sunday. So by telling Bob I would be ready on Monday, I knew that my muscles would be full, they would be voluminous, they would be pushing against the limits of the skin. So I knew that all those fuel stores would be restored and the potential for a vascular appearance would be there. All I had to do was be warmer. And that was an easy thing as well. So I had the photographer meet me at my gym. And keep in mind, the whole time, Bob is still pretty skeptical that any of this is going to do anything for him. He's just going to end up with a bunch of B-roll. So, but I knew the gym we met at had a sauna. So I was about to use some more magician's tricks, a metabolic compensation effect that I explained to you above, and use it in reverse. But just as when the body is lean, veins disappear below the surface of the skin if the body's not warm, the reverse is also true. Metabolic compensation effect. If you are warm, veins come closer to the skin, cool the body down when it gets too warm. Anybody who's leaned out, who's gone in a tanning bed, knows that how this works, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the reason you see me in a towel is because for Robert Kennedy's purpose of wanting someone really vascular, I had the photographer shoot me coming out of the sauna. So that's why you see me with a shower in the background and a towel around me. So I wanted him to catch it right away. But there's still more to the magic trick that went on there. So about 10 minutes before I entered the sauna, I instructed the photographer where to set up. And as I did so, I chewed a piece of gum with 25 milligrams of niacin. Now, niacin is an extreme, and I mean extreme vasodilator. It creates a flushing effect when it's chewed. And when it's chewed, rather than swallowed in capsule, it acts really fast, almost instantly. And I knew that would also increase the thermogenic effect of the sauna and momentarily enhance vascularity to ridiculous levels, although unsustainable levels. So I'm going to tell you more about niacin in a minute, but make no mistake here. Don't go run out and buy niacin. Niacin is nasty stuff. It can make you extremely itchy and even make your skin look blotchy red, almost like you've got scars from being in a fire. In fact, too many contest physiques were ruined back in the 80s by guys taking too much niacin backstage. It was all the rage then. But for my purposes of this photo shoot, just crunching on 25 milligrams of niacin, I knew what I was doing and chewing it with gum the results were fast, and then going into the sauna were even faster. So the result of all of that, when Robert Kennedy saw the photos, called me right away, called me, come to the office, blah blah blah. We went next door to the restaurant, sat down with Johnny Fitness. They had a pen and a pad out, and it was like he couldn't believe it. It blew his mind, and nothing really blew his mind at that point in his career because he thought he knew everything there was to know about body. So we're looking at the little slides, the photo slides, and we're looking at it through a loop. And he's like, "How is this possible? I just saw you 5 days ago when you didn't look like that." And I just told him tricks of the trade and knowledge of how the body works. That's all there is to it. And he said to me, "Can you do this all the time?" And I said, "Pretty much, at least under the right circumstances with, a few days notice." So from that day on, Robert Kennedy counted on me to make other people look drastically different for photo shoots within a week as well. Sometimes he would set up photo shoots and then have the people call me for what to do the week before. So the other thing about this is we used these little magician's tricks to show dramatic before and after photos to promote various supplements of the day. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. So that was the day that I wowed publisher Robert Kennedy, who had been around the world and back in bodybuilding at the highest levels. And yet he saw something, I showed him something he had never seen before, and it wowed him and floored him that it was even possible. And yet it was just magician's tricks. And so that's how I ended up with contracts and being on salary for various supplement companies. So I'm going to go back to this slide here. So why were they paying me, these supplement companies? Why were they? Well, they were paying me because all those before and after photos that you saw back in the day, back in those magazines, they were all because the supplement companies would look for a candidate and then send them to me for a 12-week transformation that had absolutely nothing to do with their products. I would dial these people in with my training and my diet strategy, and then the supplement companies would write these fake articles and take the credit for their magic supplements and things like that. And so I was on salary even where supplement companies were fighting over me. So I got a monthly paycheck, and then if I sent them somebody, which we'll get to at the end of this, if I sent them people, I got even more. I got a bonus. I got like for every person I sent them, I got $2,500, and if I guaranteed that their photo work in the end would be worth it, and I would get that kind of effect. So we're getting some good comments here, and I'm going to get to them. I just want to get on with it because there's more to bring in. So that is the story behind the story, but I also want to get to the supplement scams and magician's tricks that I'm trying to show you right now, of course. So as you look at that, then you see, that's the story behind the story. And then this is a little blurry, but boom. So that was the effect of the niacin and the sauna and coming out of there when really my vascularity up until then really, I mean, and even 2 hours after that had nothing to do with looking like that. So the magician's tricks part of it, well, let me just let you get a good or better look at that so you can understand what I'm talking about. And this is what blew Robert Kennedy's mind, a man whose mind had been a long time since it had been blown. And from then on, I had his trust in everything. Mr. Olympia competitors would call him and ask him for advice, and he would say, "Talk to Scott Abel." Anyway, here's some of the magician's tricks. So what I learned from tanning booth and sauna or whirlpool had a lot to do with what I call situational hypermetabolism and other effects. Now, niacin and related stories. We got Domino here saying, "I tried niacin once and man, I felt horrible and felt like I was overheating. Never again." Yeah, and that's just a dose related thing, Domino. That's exactly what I was talking about. So when I was trainer of champions and all my people were winning shows, one of the things that ticked me off early on in my career was how many people were ripping off my stuff and not giving me any credit. And they still do that now, but they would at shows, they would pass it off as their own. So knowing that it was a monkey see, monkey do world, I was pretty ruthless back then because of that. So what I would do is I would go around the shows and stuff that I knew would deliberately sabotage another trainer who was trying to copy all my stuff, would sabotage one of their clients in a show. I would deliberately get them to do without them knowing they were doing it. And niacin was one of those things. So, what I would do is I would, you know, before prejudging or at the weigh-in, which is usually the night before, I would look like I'm worried and anxious. And I would go up to these other trainers who were fools, and I would say, God, do you got 500 milligram niacin chewables? My client forgot his, and I don't have any, and we need them for tomorrow for backstage. Now, I just told you I chewed on 25 milligrams of niacin for that photo shoot. Chewing on a 500 milligram tablet of niacin will make you feel like you're on fire from the inside out. It's probably one of the worst feelings you can ever experience. Your ears go almost purple, they go so red. And your skin, no matter how ripped you were, you wouldn't look ripped anymore. You would almost look sunburnt. And of course, they would bite right into it. Another example of something like that is there was competitor coaches, and weren't in my league, but they thought they were, who had all their clients on low carb diets. So I knew if you gave them an instant dose of simple sugars, that would distend their stomachs and bloat them wickedly. So again, I did the same thing at weigh-ins. I would pretend I'm searching for, oh no, and I would go up to these trainers and go, you guys don't have any dextrose, do you? I totally forgot mine back before I left for the hotel, and I don't have any. My client doesn't have any, and we need it for pumping up tomorrow. And of course, they would run out to the drugstore and buy dextrose and have their clients downing it before the show. And sure enough, they would come out on stage with a big bloated lower pouch on their lower abdominals, and my clients would win. So those were a couple of little things, but niacin was one of those tricks. And then it didn't take long, of course, for people to figure out that don't take niacin, because it takes hours and hours to get over that feeling like you're going to die. So even though there's no danger in it, but it's a horrible feeling, and it makes you look horrible as well. So, and then there was the small amount of aldactone. So also for the photo shoot, because of my cheat day, I wanted to make sure that I had a lot of sodium on that cheat day before the photo shoot, because I was trying to look as vascular as possible. So that meant dumping a lot of sodium. So getting in, like a whole pizza and things like that. But I also wanted to control water. So the night before the contest, or before the photo shoot, I had also a small amount of aldactone, which is an aldosterone antagonist. You can read about that in my sodium article, which I wrote years and years ago, where I talk about aldactone and aldosterone. But it's also considered a mild diuretic. So I took a small amount of that as well. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is aldactone and even stronger diuretics were often, even almost always, what was behind before and after pictures you saw promoting fat burners. There was no fat burning going on, it was diuretics. So, so that was a kind of things that went on. So when you combine what I knew, how things worked and how they didn't work, to people who were just monkey see, monkey do, and believe everything you tell them, well, of course I had an upper hand. And like I said, when you can dazzle someone who's been at the top of the industry for 4 decades and have him scratching your head like a magician saying, how did you do that trick? It's like watching a hand magician right in front of you, and you're watching everything they do. But that's the sleight of hand, right? Get someone to look in the wrong direction. So it's not that the rabbit was never in the hat. Okay, it's the same kind of idea. So how these pictures were used from this photo shoot, that's what I finally want to get to, and what I call scamology. So from this photo shoot, these photos were used for everything, to sell everything from whey protein to fat burners to creatine to acetyl L-carnitine and to other completely useless supplements that I never took. Never took creatine, never took whey protein, never took any of that. And just to give you some more context, if you look at this picture, after I blew Bob Kennedy's mind with the vascularity shot, he scheduled another photo shoot for me a few weeks later. And this was just a few weeks later. And as you can see, the vascularity is not nearly as prominent because it wasn't important. We weren't shooting for that. So that was an important thing there. But this is an example of scamology. So what you do is you get someone who's getting ready for a contest or whatever, and they've been dieting for weeks and weeks, and you somehow convince them that the difference was the supplements, the useless supplements they were taking, rather than the weeks and weeks of stringent dieting and knowing how the body works, metabolic compensation and refeeds and things like that. So Robert Kennedy wanted vascularity. He got vascularity, as you can see. He got wicked vascularity, and I just wasn't that vascular, but I knew I could produce the effect for a photo shoot, and I've been doing it. I did it ever since. So, yeah, and yeah, I was pretty ruthless when it came to those things. But you know, I'm pointing this out because I'm seeing more and more of it with online nonsense now, where nothing is fact checked. And like I said, I think it's still sticking in my craw about that podcast with that Chris Kresser making wild claims about saying things that research doesn't exist about this and that when he knew damn well it does. So, I wanted to make sure I got that across. But even with Andy and photo shoots, so it wasn't too long after that where I was getting people on the covers of magazines, and I remember sending them Andy. And then that took off, of course, a life of its own. I would remember calling them up and saying I got someone with quote unquote the look. There was a certain look they were always after. With the ladies, it was Trish Stratus, who I sent to Bob Kennedy, who became a WWE superstar later on. That all started with me. And then there was, of course, Andy. So shooting Andy at photo shoots, there's Andy holding one of the covers he was on. There's Andy there. Also, on one of the covers he was on. So you can see all those. And then there's another one. I'm not going to go through them all, but there he is at a photo shoot. So here you actually see what a photo shoot actually looks like, with the lights in the background and the white paper backdrop. And that accentuates the physique you're trying to shoot because there's nothing else in the background. So that would make Andy look even more ripped than he actually was. And then there's a story behind this one. I didn't even title it. I'll let Andy tell you about that himself, but this is from a photo shoot as well. And then lo and behold, what you finally see, is the before and after. This before and after has been used by I don't know how many supplement companies. And of course, I use it in HGH because it's actually the truth, or the hard gainer solution, HGS, because it's actually the truth. This is what we did with Andy with training and diet. We bulked him up, we dieted him down, and it had nothing to do with supplements. So really, really important stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Andy into the show, and we can talk about some of this stuff. So,
Yo.
yeah, good. Okay, we can hear you. So I'm sure there might be some questions and stuff for you, bud. But you and I were chatting about this earlier, and I think a lot of it was just my frustration that people are still buying in, buying in, buying in, and as Kramer said, you don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle.
Yeah.
So even going back, even going back to my day where I could fool even Bob Kennedy, then how hard is it to fool the consumer who wants to believe in what we call wish bias? So just some thoughts. I know you have let me just bring the webinar back in, and I know you have some thoughts on that particular picture. No, sorry, this particular picture. Let me just I know you have some
Oh
thoughts on
yeah. Yeah.
so I'll let you basically, folks, I'll let Andy take that away in a second. But for some reason, that picture in particular brought out a lot of attack dogs who were wanted to call Andy names and Juice Monkey and Juice Monster. And the ironic thing was, at this point, was like Andy was one of the few people I sent to these guys who actually was natural. So yeah, get into that a little bit, buddy.
Yeah. Actually, when that picture was first posted, um, excuse me, a lot of the comments were actually, it's amazing what trend can do for your physique, right? So,
And by that,
which,
for people that don't
yeah,
know, trenbolone acetate, which is a steroid. Go ahead.
it makes you very, very, very hard, right? That's what it's known to do, hard and vascular. But at that point, I mean, I hadn't used any any drugs in probably 3 or 4 years. My diet in that particular photo, half my meals were vegan at that point, so I probably wasn't even eating a gram of protein per pound of body weight. And the other thing too to note is at the time I was also working outdoors 5 or 6 days a week, landscaping out in the hot sun. So that was creating a situational hypermetabolic influence. So I got peeled that summer, like shredded, just from from working outside. So I mean that had a huge effect. I mean I was already lean to begin with, but that just got me even more ripped, right? So
And that's more of the what we've been preaching lately, that lean without trying quotation.
yeah, I wasn't trying at all. I mean that was really the thing too. I just show up to photo shoots. Like I wouldn't have to get ready. People would be, they'd be miserable and no energy and
Other people at the photo shoots, I would
yeah,
imagine.
yeah, uh, depleted, right? So, and then I just showed up. Sometimes I'd have a cheat day, a few days before, or some days I'd just skip one on the timing. But I mean, it was never a drag or a struggle. My life isn't about, resistance. It's about enjoying the lifestyle. If I resisted it that much, I wouldn't be doing it. Like, what's the point?
And speaking of those, like I blew Robert Kennedy's mind, and he's an in at the top. He's like an insider of insiders, and then you think these people know, but they don't know, because you had the same experience with photographers, right? They start shooting you, and then they stop the photo shoot and whisper in your ear saying, "How did you get ready for this? How long did it take?" Talk about
Yeah, I mean,
that'll laugh.
no fault of theirs, because I mean they didn't know anything about exercise or diet or getting into shape. All they knew were people that showed up to photo shoots that were just dragging their ass around, right? So when
Yeah,
I came in,
can't wait till it's over so they can eat. And
yeah, like I mean, we'll talk about a non-fulfilling experience. Let's just hurry up and get this over with so I can wow, that's an honorable way to live, like
yeah, and we would even be able to. It's funny, like the industry's still that way. It's so black and white in its approach to everything, right? It's an all or nothing, black or white, or and no gray area. I remember when the agent called me way back when, and they were so concerned, right? They were like, "Okay, Robert Kennedy gave me your name and number, but we're really concerned. We need a very specific look for a cover of this romance novel we're doing, and it can't be. We can't have this big bodybuilder veins popping kind of thing." When I said, I got someone for you, no problem. It wouldn't, and they were like, "No, you don't understand. Don't be so flippant. It's a very specific." I said, "I got somebody for you. Don't worry about it." And I remember, like, so I obviously you ended up on the cover of the romance novel. We can give them the name, and they can probably go buy it for $1.99 now. But I remember the concerns, and I talked to you, and you said, "Well, what approach do you want to take?" And I said, "Well, they don't want too much bodybuilder-ish, so don't cut out your cheat days, and maybe have one the day before, and just loosen up the diet a little bit." And that's what you did, and you went in the photo shoot, and they were all toweling their heads off from sweating watching romance
yeah.
novel.
The cycle diet, I mean, that's really the key to me being in shape all the time. It was just a lifestyle. It was never anything I had to prepare. I never had to fat load or do anything special to look ready. I just showed up because I was ready. I mean, I was a fitness model, of how
Yeah,
fitness should be, right? So
yeah. No, and instead of these other guys, they're a fitness model for 1 week of every 16 weeks. Um,
yeah.
you know, and then you are looking like that. I mean, you still get that now, right? I mean, I've
Oh,
we
absolutely.
we
Yeah.
post comments that people say to you in the gym, like, "How low do your carbs have to be to look like that?" And
Yeah, yeah, or a diet of beef jerky and tuna, right? So,
I think one of the most frustrating things you and I talked about this was extricating ourselves from the supplement world, was coming to a realization eventually, even though you're under contract till the contract's over. We both went through that. Even though we were done with it, we still had to fulfill our obligations to the contracts. But um, there's the old realizing that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I know one of the supplement companies you were with, I don't remember which one, but they would send you people for, to advice and stuff. And I remember you getting frustrated because all they wanted to hear about was the supplements, and you were trying to give them
Yeah,
the give them the reality check of the
yeah,
training and the diet, and they were all about, yeah, but that testosterone booster, like, should I cycle it? And talk a little bit about, like, you went through
yeah.
what I went through basically, and it's not getting any better out there.
Just from the industry dogma, nobody was ever really interested in the actual training or diet part of it, right? Everyone just wanted that quick shortcut. They wanted to know that they could just take something and if everything else would just fall into place, right? I mean, they weren't even interested in a fitness lifestyle.
And
They,
I've said,
they, it's like they wanted to, be a rock star, but they didn't want to learn how to play the guitar or learn how to sing or anything like that. I mean, they just wanted to glorify the physique, and everything else was just a grind to get there, right? So,
in the beginning, I remember, and I've said this in a million interviews, and you've heard me say this, but when I first started, hawking supplements, for lack of a better word, I was naive. I didn't think people in the bodybuilding slash fitness industry were as different as a subculture as they actually were. I ended up learning they were. So what I looked at it when I had the endorsement contracts in the beginning, in my head, I always likened it to Michael Jordan being on the Wheaties box. And so I
yeah,
always thought, well, there isn't a normal person on the planet who thinks Michael Jordan plays basketball that way because he eats Wheaties, right? It's just like a to the victor go
yeah.
the spoils kind of
It's
thing. And I was looking at it the same way, but in bodybuilding and fitness, it's different. People actually buy into this crap. So,
Yeah,
you
for
know,
whatever reason, like I see Sidney Crosby, drinking Gatorade. I mean, that has nothing to do with him being the best hockey player in the world. I mean, Gatorade,
no, it
Gatorade has no.
has to do with playing hockey since you were 2 years old.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, he could drink vinegar playing, and he'd play just as well. So,
But that's, I mean, it's a thing that's lost on most people because, I mean, even watching the Ronnie Coleman thing, which we'll talk a little bit about, but he talks about his supplement line, and it made this much million the first year and this many millions the second year, which just basically says how ridiculously naive consumers are. And it was the same thing before that Rich Piana guy. I never even heard of him before he passed away, but just a guy was like mutant on a mutant amount of anabolic
yeah,
performance enhancing drugs, and yet people somehow think getting behind a supplement line that, like, I don't know what the thinking is, the thought process. Oh, they must know they're top of the line professional body. Trust me, they had nothing to do with the formulations, and they have nothing to do with selling the product. They're a figurehead, just like I was, just like you were. Um, but the fact that you can make this many million selling products just shows how incredibly naive people are. And that's why I wanted to do this webinar, because it's all magician's tricks. It's all nonsense. That, there's not somebody's, does it really matter if you did, I forget what's the name of Ronnie Coleman's company, one and I don't know what
you
it's
know
called.
what? Yeah, I'm not even sure. Yeah,
It's just, let's say I have a product, is it really make a difference if you're doing Muscle Tech or you're doing Able Body Secrets, and you're taking their version of creatine and someone's taking my version of creatine or my supplement stack? And yet that's what you see all the time. Like, when people wanted me to comment on that Chris Kresser, I don't want to say idiot, but that's not fair. But the first thing I checked out, you go to his page, and it's a gazillion supplement stacks for this, for adrenal fatigue, and for cleanses, and for detox. And it was just like nonsense. But the sales numbers, you know, reflect the nonsense, right? So, and you see that all the time. As a matter of fact, here's a story for you folks that a lot of people don't know. Is when I was with one of the supplement companies, they would often have in-house competitions, like 12-week transformations, and then they would do a big story on whoever won. So they looked at it as motivation for their staff to get ready, and they would contact their anabolic steroid and Utah, Colorado, they would, they took this fat burner, and they took this. protein bar, and they took this protein shake, and they took this, testosterone booster, and none of it was true, of course, right? So, and yet it made it to the magazines, and these days it would make it online, and on it goes, because I think people want to believe. They generally want to believe in magic. They want to believe in wish bias, that they can just sort of buy into the identity of something, and then like if anyone thinks that Ronnie Coleman looks like Ronnie Coleman because of supplements, like that's just I don't get how any rational human being could come up to that conclusion. But that's a whole other thing as well, right? So, but one of the things on that, if people got Netflix and you haven't watched the Ronnie Coleman thing, it's hard to watch in some places. Just finished his 10th surgery. Um, and I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see, as the guys who started really, really maximally abusing the drugs get older, we're going to see more and more issues. So it's funny, you and I were talking a few weeks back how somebody made a comment about T. Colin Campbell's physique, and that's what made them cautious about going vegan. The man's 84 years old.
And he's
Here's
still writing books, and he's still active, and
and
he's
yeah,
still
so here's some
he's on.
context to consider, folks. T. Colin Campbell is still being productive at his career and what he had always done at 84 years old because of a vegan diet. Ronnie Coleman is younger than me and has now gone through his 10th surgery. And I don't know if he's still walking on those crutches, if he can still walk straight or whatever. And he's still, because of his identity factor with being a bodybuilder, he's still trying to work out against the advice of his surgeons and everyone else. Now, I also have deteriorating discs and vertebrae, and I have no doubt my steroid use has a lot to do with that. And I wish they had talked about that, in the documentary, and they didn't. But when the day comes when I can't train around that, then I will just increase my walks that I do 6 days a week because I like walking. But the day really shouldn't be none. And that's when it was painful to watch. There's a fine line where you can devote yourself beyond what's healthy, for long term. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that in the bodybuilding world. That was hard to watch in some spots.
Well, I mean, there's a big difference between loving something and being obsessed with something. I think when you actually love something, your love for it exceeds your need for it. I mean, when you're obsessed, I mean that becomes a really, really, tricky part, right? So, I mean, it creates a lot of destruction in someone's life when you when something becomes a need as opposed to just something that you love to do, right? It becomes an
Well,
identity.
yeah, you wrap your identity up in it, and then. But I think we're going
Yeah.
to see more of this. I think we're going to start seeing like more of these guys suffering, and that was suffering, right? I mean, he's already on a whack of painkillers and stuff, and I mean, the suffering doesn't get much more obvious than that. 10
Yeah.
surgeries later, and you're still trying to 6 months rehab to walk again. And I went through a little of that with my back surgery, and that was scary enough. I can't imagine 10 surgeries. So heart goes out to the guy, but still. So let's get to some comments or questions if anybody has any. Let me just say, David here. Hey Scott, your knowledge is amazing. Niacin scared the crap out of me. I turned into a thermometer, turning red throughout my body. Never again. Yeah, it can be, if you really want to play a nasty trick on someone, get them to chew a 500 milligram um, pill of niacin and just wait about 20 minutes and watch what starts happening. They will curse you forever. So yeah, I mean it's a, but when it, again, in proper amounts, it can do exactly what you want it to do, as it did for me in that photo shoot. So really important stuff. So And that's David again. So I wouldn't say I'm evil, David. Yeah, I did play these people, and I was dastardly about it, but it's more dastardly for someone to steal my work and claim it as their own. And when that was going on, I even there was one year I trained a bunch of people for the North American, and one of the fellows that he won everything. He won scorecard, instead of calling me money and a notepad and tell me everything Abel had you do, and I'm going to pay you. So it was that kind of stuff. So you could say I'm evil, but I would say that's even more, I think that's even lower to do what they were doing back then, trying to just not acknowledge, that I knew what I was doing and give props. So why not use it against people who just wanted to be monkey see, monkey do? So very important. Mike says my audio is fading. Hopefully, you people can hear me okay. And we're almost done anyway. I know I'm getting an echo. You got a washer or a dryer on or something like that, buddy?
No, nothing. I even
Oh,
muted the football game.
oh, shoot. Okay. So, I mean, any final thoughts on the stuff I presented? I mean, hopefully it helped somebody, but when it
Yeah, I
comes to
mean,
supplements, it's all the rabbit in the hat, and it's all sleight of hand. It's all magician's tricks. But
it always
um,
comes down to sustainable lifestyle, something that you enjoy and love doing. It's never about needing to do something. It's never about needing to look a certain way. That those are very destructive thought processes that breed obsession. And obsessing over something isn't loving something. Those are two completely different things, right? So, like I said,
yeah,
your love for anything will always exceed your need for it. And like you said, you would never keep trying to train if your back got so bad that you were, you know, walking around in crutches or a wheelchair. I mean, you just say, you know what, I have to, change my training to this now. I have to go for longer walks. I can't just keep trying to be Scott Abel of 1989, right? Like it's just you have to
yeah. So, but
you have to love
this was
yourself enough.
more for the consumer end of things too. I want people to start realizing when they're being sold a bill of goods that if something sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. So, the we can talk another time about mastery versus obsession and the rest of it, but right, this was more of a buyer beware kind of thing that you and I both been on the supplement endorsement end of things, and I got a salary for exactly the opposite of why they were using me. So I would dial people in for photo shoots and contests, and the supplement company would make all the claims. But Kari's just saying, I feel like people only want something physical to buy, and so many business are always trying to come up with new things to sell and make money. Well, of course, I mean, this whole industry is founded upon that, Kari. I mean, it's constantly cleanses and detoxes. Oh, and now the latest thing, of course, I don't know, late to me, but I keep seeing it pop up again and again. Is this nonsense? The metabolic resets. That's all the rage now. Which are really just diets, which I'm talking about in my next video that you'll have in a week or two. Complete and utter nonsense, as is like what I released last week. So, and David's just saying, yeah, it's he's 62, training at a high intensity. As we get older, have to train smart. Yep, always. It should always be about training smart, and a lot of people don't
Yeah.
know what that is, but that's okay too. I mean, if you don't know what that is, then get a good coach. And so yeah, that's it. So that's all I had for tonight. I just wanted to do the story behind the story because people were asking me about something. Obviously, someone steroids and then the other things that you know that went along with that particular photo shoot, it's going with tricks and trades, manipulating the body, and then credit for it. So apparently, there's been audio. We're gonna find out. We'll just see if it's fixed. So, thanks for joining me, folks. see everybody in the next cast. Sound seems to be a lot better now for some reason. So hopefully, I don't know if as soon as I put Andy in the lobby, for some reason that I stopped hearing that echo. I don't know if you guys are all the same either. So um, I have no idea, David. What are the guys taking out in Dubai to be? I don't know, David. I'm out of that world. I have nothing to do with that stuff. When I did my video on the death of Rich Piana and that other guy, I can't remember his name now, Dallas, somebody, I think his name was. People were sending me what the latest stacks are out there, and the latest stacks out there are just crazy. I mean, they're obviously people who have no respect for their bodies at all. So, apparently, Andy, the sound issues were on your end. I could hear it too, and a little garbled. So that's what people are saying. As soon as I put you in the lobby, my sound is crystal clear again. So we'll have to do something next time. Maybe a headset instead of earbuds. I don't know. I'm not a tech guy, but we'll figure that out. So you can hear me, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, folks. So that's it. Hopefully, you guys benefited in some way, shape, or form. So, yeah, hopefully, you got some benefit out of this. But be careful when you start seeing, plugs with for supplements that go beside pictures of physiques. Take all that with a grain of salt. And yeah, we will. I'll try to do more of this insider stuff. A couple weeks from now, I'll be a lot freer to talk about those years. Right now, I'm a little hesitant to do that for reasons that you don't need to know. So, yeah. So, but I will be talking about the steroid years in future webinars, and people can ask me anything about that then. But keep in mind, I don't know anything about that world now. I can tell you about that world when I was in it, but that was a long, long time ago. And there are many stories to tell from there, of course, but that'll have to wait for another time. So, yep. So if you benefited from it, throw some emoticons across the screen, hit your share button, etc. So looks like we got one fan. Amelia liked it. Amelia, you probably like just looking at Andy, but that's fine. That's not uncommon. So, all right, folks, we will see you in the next video. And that's it for tonight. And see you soon.